We have a very exciting topic today, our legal update, and it's about returning to work in a COVID world. We have Frank Del Barto here today to talk about some of those updates and reasonable accommodations with returning to work. Before I do pass it over to him and he does an introduction, I just want to make sure that everybody knows that we will take questions at the end. Frank will be talking for about 25 to 30 minutes, and then we'll open it up for discussion for any questions that you guys might have. In the meantime, you can start building those questions in the chat, and we'll make sure that we get to them at the end of this presentation. I'm going to now turn it over to Frank. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Just 2 seconds of my background. My name is Frank Del Barto. I'm the practice group chair at Masuda Fanai here, working out of the Schaumburg office. Our main office is downtown. We have a Schaumburg office and a California office. As I said, I chair up the employment and benefits group, but we are a full service law firm. What we wanted to do today is just take a 25, 30 minutes of go through actually kind of 3 topics, just kind of ground everybody on the latest guidance from the EEOC and the various agencies about COVID vaccines and bringing people back to work. We're all experiencing something that we've never experienced before. Obviously, we all went remote very quickly in many cases, and now we're bringing people back, and we're getting kind of all sorts of reasons why people can come back, why they can't come back. And so we'll talk a little bit about kind of 3 parts. We'll talk about the vaccinations. We'll talk about the real world challenges we're going through right now, what accommodations look like, even those things that we'll put in quotes called accommodations that may not necessarily be a legal accommodation, but maybe a personnel policy that you're considering or a way to assist an employee. And then we'll talk about documenting the remote work relationship. Just touch on that a little bit. I think the remote work is here to stay in various forms. Obviously, it's going to be based on company culture and what the feel of the company is and how people reacted to COVID-19. Obviously, there are some companies that are not going remote, but there are just as many that are. And so it's really going to be an interesting path to see how the world changes in this remote work environment. Certainly, I think companies will be more flexible about that. But then, as I say that yesterday in the paper, the New York financial firms will say, no, everybody comes back to work. We're not paying you a New York salary to sit at home. So there's going to be different views about work from home, but I think it's going to be here in many ways for all of us, which is a good way. Just kind of grounding ourselves on the vaccinations, make sure we're clear on where that guidance is coming from. Most of the vaccine guidance is coming from the EEOC, which again is the federal agency that's putting out guidance based on federal law. So employers with 15 or more employers, right? And then we have the CDC, and then we have OSHA. So we have all various agencies putting out various guidance on what employers can and cannot do. The best guidance that's come out so far, or the most clear guidance that we've had so far, has come out from the EEOC, and it was actually published in December. And they have this pamphlet that they keep updating, or Q&A that they keep updating. And that's the title of it up top, What You Should Know About COVID-19, the ADA, and other EEO laws. And what it is the EEOC posing questions and then answering the questions. And it's actually a very good document that they continuously update. The latest update was on the addition of Section K, that talked about vaccinations. And this is kind of the guidance that most employers were looking for is, can we have a mandatory vaccination policy? That answer is yes. You can have a mandatory vaccination policy, but like everything else, as long as we consider those things that are either religious accommodations or disability related, right? So we can have a mandatory vaccination policy, but we also have to consider if that employee cannot be vaccinated due to a religious reason, a disability, pregnancy reason, or some other reason that we may need to accommodate. And if you remember last month, there was a federal court in Texas that upheld a mandatory vaccination policy for Houston Methodist Hospital, who gave employees a period of time to make sure they were vaccinated. And for those employees that were not vaccinated, they were going to suspend them for 2 weeks. And obviously there was a lawsuit over that, went to court, and the federal judge in Texas said, no, absolutely. You can have a mandatory vaccination policy. And in this particular case, where the employees were simply just refusing the vaccination policy, That particular judge in Texas, again, federal judge in Texas, it's not binding on every other state, right? But it's a federal court in Texas said, absolutely, the employer can have a mandatory vaccination policy, especially in a medical setting, where the idea of the employer is to keep the patient safe from COVID-19. We can require employees to have it. But where all the action, obviously, on that is, it's going to be in the accommodations, right? So we'll talk about that in a second. So why can we have why can we require employees to have a vaccination, and why can we do that? Is because the guidance has come out that says a vaccination is not a medical exam, okay? So for ADA purposes, Americans with Disability Act purposes, the vaccination itself is not a medical exam, so we can do that. Where we run into trouble and we have to be careful with is unvaccinated employees. If we can't ask them why they're not vaccinated. We can ask them, are they vaccinated? We can ask them to show proof of a vaccination, the card, or a note from their doctor or something of that nature to show proof of the vaccination. But we can't ask them why they're not, because that would then could cause the employee to give us medical information, and that would be considered a disability inquiry. So very clearly, we can have mandatory vaccinations subject to the ADA requirements. We can ask employees for their card to show proof that they were vaccinated. For example, at the firm, our HR manager did ask everybody for proof of vaccination. So we did a survey, who's vaccinated, who's not, and then an anonymous survey, who's vaccinated, who's not, to get a feel for how many people are. And then HR asked for copies of the vaccination cards from everybody so we can get a feel for what are our safety procedures going forward. Because if you're thinking about it, right now we have populations that are part vaccinated, part not vaccinated. I don't know that we have many employers that are fully vaccinated 100%. And what's going to be interesting with this is how this plays out in our accommodations. Do we have to give it an accommodation? Is it an accommodation? We'll talk about that more a little bit later in terms of the real world scenarios that we're working through right now, because there's not going to be a lot of black and white answers. You're going to operate in the gray, which is obviously what we do all the time in employment and human resources. We don't always have an absolute clear line that we can follow. So again, simply asking for proof of the vaccination is not going to be considered a violation of the ADA. Here's where all the activity is, though, right? If we have an individual who says they have a disability, whether it's a pregnancy or some other reason why they can't be vaccinated, or a religious accommodation, right? They don't have to use the words like in the FMLA, right? They don't have to use the word FMLA for us to recognize that it's an FMLA event. Same with disability accommodation. The employee's not going to know, may not recognize the word ADA. All they know is their personal situation. So obviously with the vaccinations and disability accommodations, we're going through that same analysis that we go through for any other ADA type of claim that an employee had in the past. We're going through that interactive dialogue. We're trying to identify accommodations that we can make for the employee. Obviously, the employee's accommodation may be, I have to work from home. That's the only accommodation there is. And we'll talk about that more when we get to the real world scenarios, because some of the information we're getting from doctors is in some way helping their patient, but in some ways it's also hurting their patient, because they are saying that the patient can't come back to work until the vaccination rate is 95 to 100%. Well, doctor, we don't have to accommodate that. That we may never reach 95 to 100%. So we'll talk about that in a second. But again, this whole idea of accommodations is where we're spending a lot of our time right now. What is a reasonable accommodation? The employee, he or she wants to work from home. He or she's afraid to come to the office. Are they afraid to come to the office because of a disability? Or are they afraid to come to the office just because they're afraid to come to the office? So we work through that. And many times what we're doing in these cases is we're putting our decisions in writing. Why we want you to come back to the office, the safety features we've put in place, because if, normally in the legal world, we say we don't want it in writing, right? We don't want that paper to come out. In this types of cases, I think we do, right? We want to show that we acted in a reasonable manner. We want to tell you what the safety procedures we have in place, Because if I tell you what I've done, again, I don't have to agree with your accommodation. And that's really where a lot of the discussion is right now is what is a reasonable accommodation? Again, the employee, he or she simply just wants to work from home. That may not be the only accommodation. We can bring that person back to work in different ways. Sincerely held religious beliefs. This is one that the EEOC talked about as well. And their basic position on the religious belief is you have to accommodate it. And they're just recognizing in the guidance that for employers recognize that a religious belief could be very broad, and it could be some type of religion or practice or observance that may not be traditional. That doesn't mean the employer should question it. Basically, what the EEOC is saying, unless you're absolutely sure this is just some thing the employee is dreaming up, assume it is a sincerely held religious belief and act accordingly. Try to accommodate it if you can. If you can't, go through the next step. But again, I think in the most of the EEOC guidance, they've kind of gone to the religious belief and just touched on it. They're spending most of their time talking about disabilities. And obviously that's where we're spending all of our time as well. We haven't had a whole lot of questions on religion, right? We haven't had people question about whether or not there's a religious belief of why somebody can't be vaccinated. So in the EEOC guidance, just staying on that, if the employee can't be vaccinated and there's no accommodation, then we can exclude them from the workplace, right? But even if we exclude them from the workplace, that doesn't mean we can terminate them. So again, this is in the accommodation context. This is different from the employee just refusing something. But again, if the employee says, I can't be vaccinated because disability, religion, pregnancy, we have to try to accommodate that. If the employee says, I can't be vaccinated because I just don't want to be, that's a different story. And we can try to accommodate them. And I'm using the word accommodate in quotes. We can bring them back to work. We don't need to allow them to stay at home. They just continue with the safety procedures. So we have that, right? So many companies will have people who are unvaccinated. That doesn't mean we have to allow them to stay at home. We can bring them back to work. They wear a mask, they social distance. They still do all the procedures, the safety procedures that were going on prior to. Now, does that challenge us if everybody's vaccinated and one employee's not? Yeah, it does. But what's the alternative? Allow the employee to stay at home because he or she is unvaccinated? But again, each one of these scenarios that we're working through is going to be different based on the company, right? What is your tolerance for that? What do you want to do? What can you do? What's the employee's position? Can the employee work from home? Is it a manufacturing environment? Is it an office environment? So there's a lot of factors that we've never even had to consider in this accommodation context about bringing people back to work. Just a couple of real world scenarios just to touch on them real quickly. An employee declares that he or she will not have the vaccination for 2 or 3 years or until the employee deems it safe. So, and again, this is regionalized, this is localized. Not everybody believes in the vaccination, right? Not everybody believes that the vaccination is the cure-all. Certainly the government is encouraging it, employers are encouraging it. I don't know that we've had many employers mandate it. Most of our clients, I think, are simply strongly encouraging it, giving time off to get it. I don't think many of our clients have given the extended sick time again that was passed under the American Recovery Plan. Most clients are saying, we're done with the Families First Act. We'll just allow you to take 3 hours off or 4 hours off to get it. We're not going through another 80 hours of paid sick time. Some clients have instituted the paid sick time. So again, it's really a client specific thing, but we do have some clients where the employee is simply just refusing to get the vaccination. So what do we do with that? What position is that employee in? This particular group, it's not a manufacturing environment, it's an office environment. So what is the accommodation? Again, it's not an accommodation in the ADA sense, but does this company allow that person to come back to work? Or do they just simply allow them to stay home? Do they put them on a leave of absence until he or she gets the vaccination? Do they fire them? So again, there's going to be a lot of gray area here. If we fire them, then what does that do? That drives up our unemployment cost, right? If I suspend them, which is what the Texas hospital was doing, they suspended the people for 14 days without pay in order to encourage them to get the vaccination. those employees said that we're being coerced into getting it. And the federal judge said, no, you're not. You don't have to work there anymore. Go ahead and quit. So again, it's going to be very different for each client and each company about how you deal with the individuals who don't get vaccinated. In our office today, I don't know who they are, but we have some people who are probably unvaccinated. If you're unvaccinated in our office, you still have to follow the old safety protocols, right? Wear a mask, socially distant, keep your distance from people. So those unvaccinated people are still going through the safety protocols. Now, we also have people who are vaccinated who are still wearing masks, right? So just because somebody's wearing a mask, it does not mean that they're unvaccinated. It just means that that person may feel less safe. I'm vaccinated, but I still feel a little queasy in large groups of people. So again, there's different tolerance levels that we're all dealing with as we go through this. On the next one here, a fully vaccinated employee requests to continue to work from home because his or her spouse is a transplant recipient with a compromised immune system. The employee says they're simply afraid to come to work because they're afraid of bringing the virus home. So how do you deal with that? If the person's fully vaccinated, in theory, again, it's all theory, right? We're all relying on CDC guidance, and what we're hearing is there's less likelihood that they could bring that virus home. But we all have heard the other stories too, of people who are, in theory, fully vaccinated who have come down with COVID. So it's not 100% either way. What does this company do? What if we say that this employee is not fully vaccinated and they're now asking for the ability to stay at home and work, even though the rest of the company's back? Or the last case here, where a fully vaccinated employee requested to continue to work from home until the vaccination rate is 95 to 100%. What do we do with that, right? A lot of these times when we're getting into these accommodations, like in the old world prior to COVID, we would give them a functional capacity form, right? And send it to the doctor. And the doctor, he or she gets the form. It's 3 pages long. They fill out the bare minimum on the form and send it back. And they expect the employer to make a decision based on an incomplete form. Very often we have to turn that form around and say, doctor, now complete the entire form. We need all of the information, not just the questions you want to answer. And then once the doctor completes the form, then we're able to take a look at that and say, okay, can we accommodate this person? First, going through the ADA, the first question is, does this person have a disability, right? That's our first question. Does this person have a disability that we even have to accommodate? In the second example here, it's a spouse. So the employee who's asking for the accommodation to work from home, that employee doesn't have the disability. So that's not really an ADA accommodation, right? That's a employer making an accommodation because the employer believes that there's a reason to accommodate that employee. But this employer is worried about, well, what do we do with our other employees, right? We're bringing everybody else back to work. This person here wants to just work at home because the spouse is a transplant victim or transplant recipient. What do we do with that? Or the doctor situation in point 3 there, where the doctor's saying that the employee can't come back to work until the workforce is 60 to 70% vaccinated. And essentially the entire world or the entire US is 95 to 100% vaccinated. Well, doctor, we can't accommodate that. It may never be 95 to 100% vaccinated. Our workforce may never be 65 to 70% vaccinated or whatever the doctor requested. So what do we do with that? Again, we don't have to agree with the accommodation the doctor has asked for. We can bring that employee back to work. What do? We tell that employee that we've reviewed the doctor's request. We don't think we can accommodate that. However, this is what we can accommodate. We can bring you back to the office. We're all wearing masks. We're all cleaning every day. You have your own office. You'll have very little interaction with people. So we can give that employee a way to come back. We don't necessarily have to say no to them. But in this particular case, you're basically asking for an accommodation in the third example that may be permanent, right? The world may never be 95 to 100% vaccinated. So that's an unreasonable request from the doctor. We're not going to agree with that. Just switching gears just for a couple of seconds on the remote work. Obviously, there's a lot of talk about remote work. Sherm has produced some really good articles on this. The newspaper has something every day on it. And what you're hearing is a lot of information on both ways, right? There's not going to be one right answer for this work from home. As I mentioned earlier, the paper yesterday was talking about, the investment firms in New York requiring everybody to come back to work. There's no working from home. We're an investment firm. We're paying you a New York salary. You're going to work in the office. And that's basically what the CEOs of these companies are saying. Other companies are more flexible about it. They've figured out that, well, not everybody can work from home, but some people can. Maybe they can work from home 1 day a week. Maybe we should be more flexible about this. So there's not going to be a right answer. And I just anecdotally, I think most people would prefer kind of a hybrid, right? I come to work a couple of days a week. I can work from home if I have to. That's kind of a good work-life balance, but I don't know if every company is going to go that way. What do we hear? If people aren't in the office, we lose collaboration. If people people work from home, saying I'm more efficient and more productive because I don't have the commute time. So again, different things for different companies. Impact on recruiting. We have one client, they've lost out on a couple of people because the employee is asking about in the interview process, what is your work from home policy now that we have this COVID situation? I don't really want to come to the office 5 days a week anymore. I'm sorry, we have a 5-day work week in the office. Everybody's in the office every day. I'm sorry, this is not where I want to work. So the idea of workplace flexibility has really become really interesting. My daughter works for a company, Salesforce in California. They've reimagined the entire office. It's not really an office anymore. It's really a collaboration space where you come to collaborate with your team. You don't necessarily go to your desk and sit there for 8 hours a day. But if you're going to have a work from home policy, whether it's hybrid, mandatory, partially mandatory, we do encourage that you have some form of policy about working from home. Not everybody can work from home, right? Not everybody's going to be effective at it. So is there an application process? Is there an approval process? Is it at the manager level? Is it the HR level? Is it 2 levels of approval? Just to make sure we understand what we're getting ourselves into. What are the performance expectations, working hours, right? You always hear that, I called Frank at home. I had a question to ask him. He's out walking his dog, right? That's always the reason you get for why people shouldn't work from home. So what are the expectations about working from home? What's the working hours? What about the timekeeping requirements? Many of our clients have allowed non-exempt employees to work from home too. Got to make sure we capture that time, right? We don't want unrecorded time and create a wage and hour issue out of giving somebody the ability to work from home. What are the equipment needs for the employee? Desk, printer, paper, right? Making sure the employee doesn't go out and buy furniture that's not approved. We had that early on in the pandemic where an employee went out and bought one of the Vera desks and tried to submit it to the employer as a business expense. And said, well, you sent me home. I needed to operate from home. I didn't have a desk, so I bought this Vera desk so I can stand up and sit down periodically. So again, what are the equipment needs and making sure we're not getting ourselves into a situation where we're remodeling an employee's house. The last one there, expenses, make sure we recognize that as well. If we do have employees at home, especially in Illinois and California and most states, we're gonna have to make sure we're paying for their reasonable business expenses, which includes internet and phone, right? So, and that's very hard because internet and phone are kind of connected together. So what do we do for the employees who's working from home? Illinois clearly has a statute about reimbursing employees for expenses that are for the benefit of the employer. So there's California and many other states. So what should that amount be? You're probably going to have to come out with some general number to say, okay, I'm not paying your entire phone bill because it's connected to your internet, which is connected to your TV, but what should it be? Securing company information, cybersecurity concerns, obviously, with people working from home. A lot of the cybersecurity breaches that happened late last year and in the middle part of last year are due to remote work. So what are our cybersecurity features? What are employees doing at home? Are they operating on their own computer? Are they operating on a company computer? So again, that idea of employees working remotely, what system are they using and what are the security measures in that? I know here they're kind of annoying, but we always have the IT team, sending out, kind of phishing emails internally to see who's gonna open the bad email just so we're always aware of it. And then if you open it, then you go to an hour of training about opening bad emails. So again, but it keeps our consciousness level up about what's out there in terms of cybersecurity. And then ending the arrangement. We want to make sure we can always end the arrangement for any reason or no reason. So if we've changed our mind on remote work, or it doesn't work out with this particular employee, he or she's not productive, or we simply decide this isn't for us anymore, we want to be able to end that and not make it a condition of employment. So just real quickly on the kind of summarizing, mandatory vaccinations are permissible under federal law and in most state laws. We got to worry about discrimination, about vaccinations in some sense, right? I think Montana may be the only state right now that has a law about whether or not somebody is vaccinated is a protected classification. Who knows if other states will do that? We can ask for proof of vaccination. We just can't ask people why they're not vaccinated. A lot of our time is going to be spent on this ADA accommodation. What is an accommodation? Is it a reasonable accommodation? And again, we start with the first question. Is this person asking me an inquiry that's disability related, religious related, pregnancy related, or is this just an accommodation that they would like to work from home? So again, in our second scenario there, where we're talking about the employee with the spouse who's compromised, this employee is not compromised, so it's not an ADA analysis, but it is, in quotes, an accommodation that they're asking for. All of these accommodation requests are going to be unique. Very often we have to kind of sit back and just kind of walk through it to make sure we're basing it on EEOC guidance, CDC guidance, OSHA guidance, and then what's right for the employee and what's right for the company's culture, right? There's a legal answer sometimes, there's a practical answer sometimes there's neither, right? There's neither a real good, clear legal answer or real good practical answer, and you have to kind of operate in the gray. The legal answer sometimes could be clear. Well, terminate them, but that sounds easy. Let's just terminate people, but then we have to replace them. Now they're on unemployment. So we don't just simply move to termination very quickly in these cases. We'll try to encourage the employee to get the vaccination, tell them what they do if they don't get the vaccination, and just try and work with it that way. And then the last point here, if we're going to continue with remote work, we just strongly encourage people and clients to make sure you have a policy about that. It doesn't have to be 12 pages, but put some guidelines in place, because the success from working at home is really about the expectations. And what is the employer's expectations? What is the employee's expectations? And once we're sure that we have the same expectations, I think working from home remotely on a hybrid basis or periodically is beneficial for a lot of companies. But we'll see how that turns out. I hope that was helpful. We kind of went through a couple of topics real quickly: the vaccinations, real world scenarios, and work from home. I can open it up to questions now and do my best to provide any guidance I can.
Frank, if you want to stop sharing your screen, and we apologize, guys, we weren't able to put this in presentation while we had some technology issues, but we'll be sending you this PowerPoint and the recording sometime this week, so you have those for your resources. Frank, there is a list of questions. So we had a lot of people asking questions while you're speaking. So how do you suggest we handle vaccinated versus non-vaccinated? All are returning to our office on 7/2/2021. And Debbie, if you want to add more comments on it so that Frank can give more guidance, please let us know.
So we keep going back and forth, Frank. We're coming back on the 12th. Do we allow those that have been vaccinated to not wear masks and those that have not been vaccinated to continue to wear masks? And we're getting pushback from several of the managers about that. So I just want to throw that out there and see what's really the best policy. And if those in Utah, my manager is having problems because she's the only one who's been vaccinated, and she feels like she's become the police officer in the office.
Right. So I think many companies are going to the same thing, our company included. So we have employees, and a lot of our clients do as well, as you know, Debbie, where I think every company is going to have vaccinated and unvaccinated employees. The company can't shut down, right? So unless we have a mandatory vaccination policy that bars people who are not vaccinated, then we're going to more than likely require the unvaccinated employees to continue following the protocols. Wear a mask, socially distance. It becomes obviously challenging because there's meetings. What do we do with employees who are unvaccinated in meetings? But I think as a general rule, what most companies are doing is the vaccinated employee, kind of following the CDC guidance and the OSHA guidance, he or she doesn't have to wear the mask and do the social distancing and do all those things anymore. The unvaccinated employee still does. So the unvaccinated employee still has to wear the mask, still has to social distance, still has to do all of those things that we were all doing before. Now, obviously, when they're in their office or they're, socially, more than 6 feet from somebody, they don't have to do that. But once they enter the common area of the office, the copy room, the break room, whatever, then they have to go through the safety protocols. I don't know how else companies are going to do it. It's a very awkward position that we have right now because we do have probably just in every company, vaccinated and unvaccinated employees to different degrees. Like you're mentioning the manager in Utah, the manager is vaccinated, but the other employees are not. It's very regionalized as well, as you're mentioning Utah, down in the southern states as well. There's a lot of unvaccinated employees, and the view of the vaccine is very different in the South, right? In some of the Tennessee and Georgia and Alabama, those states really didn't shut down. They didn't believe there was a COVID situation that they really had to deal with. Eventually they got there, but they were slow to move there, and they've moved back very quickly to everything's back to normal. So I think what most companies are going to wind up doing is, following the CDC guidance. We're not going to allow unvaccinated people to use that as a reason to stay at home, but we are going to require them to continue to follow the protocols when they do come to work. Again, it's not going to be an ideal situation because, if we have a meeting, we've got unvaccinated employees and vaccinated employees in the same meeting. What do we do? The vaccinated employees sit on one side of the table and the unvaccinated employees sit on the other side of the table. So there's a lot of practical challenges to two different groups of populations in any office, and we'll experience that as well.
Frank, if let's just say those that have not been vaccinated continue to not wear their mask, can we discipline them at some point, or do we just keep suggesting put your mask back on?
No, so if the employer has a policy that vaccinated, so kind of operating off the latest OSHA guidance, right, or the CDC guidance, fully vaccinated people do not have to wear a mask and can go about their normal activities, right? Unvaccinated employees, our policy is that unvaccinated employees must continue to wear the mask, must continue to social distance. If that's the company's policy, that's fully enforceable. Remember, the company has an overall obligation to protect the safety of all employees. So if I have a handful of employees who are flouting the masking requirement, and I know they're unvaccinated, then absolutely I can tell them to put their mask on. Absolutely, I can write them up. That's my company policy. If you don't want to adhere to that policy, then there's disciplinary actions for that. Again, going under the overall umbrella of my job is to protect the safety of the employees in general, not cater to individual beliefs about the vaccination or whether or not somebody has it or not. So I can absolutely discipline somebody for not wearing the mask. I want to make sure my policy is clear, though, that this is our requirement as of X date.
Okay, and then one last question. If they're sitting at their desk and they are 6 feet apart, can they take their mask off if they're unvaccinated?
Yeah, absolutely. So in what we're doing, and I think most companies are doing, if you're more than 6 feet apart from people, if you're unvaccinated, you can take your mask off. I'm not going to ask you in many cases to sit there with your mask on all day, even though you're unvaccinated. So if you're socially distant from people, but once you get within 6 feet of people or in the common areas, then you got to put your mask on. That's kind of what we were doing here. I could be in my office, unmasked, but whenever I went into a common area, I had to put my mask on. And so that's kind of what I think most companies are doing in terms of vaccinated versus unvaccinated. If you're more than 6 feet from people, you don't have to keep the mask on. But once you close that distance, you have to put your mask on if you're unvaccinated. The challenge we have, obviously, is, we've got people who are vaccinated too who are wearing the mask by choice. So just because somebody's wearing a mask, it doesn't necessarily mean they're unvaccinated. We may have vaccinated people who are wearing the mask just because they still feel unsafe. it's a very difficult environment we're all operating in right now.
Thank you.
So Frank, people are asking, should we follow the CDC or the EEOC with rules when it comes to
EEOC, OSHA, CDC. So the EEOC is basically providing guidelines for those employers with 15 or more, right? Because the EEOC's guidance is federal law, 15 or more. What you're finding is the states are, even though the states, you may be an employer with fewer than 15 employees, the states are kind of adopting that policy too. What you're seeing right now is the CDC, OSHA, and the EEOC, they are trying to coordinate their guidance so it makes sense and there's not conflicting guidance. So the latest OSHA guidance was really trying to match the CDC guidance. So the CDC came out first and said people don't need to wear a mask. Then OSHA came out in early June and said, okay, this is what people who are vaccinated can do. We agree with the CDC, but that OSHA guidance also dealt with those employees who are unvaccinated and those employees who may be compromised. But the employees who may be compromised and the employees who are unvaccinated, if you look at the OSHA guidance that was issued in June, it basically went through all of the safety protocols that we talked about before there was a vaccine. Face masking, social distancing, cleaning, all those protocols are basically just put back out there again. So I think you'll be in good shape by following the CDC, EEOC, OSHA guidance. I would monitor them, all three of them, but they've really done a really good job of trying to make sure the guidance is consistent in terms of what can we do with vaccinated and unvaccinated employees. The other thing you want to look for, just as a double check, is check the states you're operating in. And then also if there's a local statute. For example, when the CDC first came out with the masking guidance, changed the guidance, Illinois followed suit with that and said, okay, we'll follow the CDC. But in one particular case, Mount Prospect, they didn't yet. So they were requiring employers in Mount Prospect to continue following the old guidance, the old masking guidance, until Illinois affirmatively said that they're following the CDC guidance. Illinois, if you remember, they just put up, the Illinois Department of Public Health put up kind of a summary of the CDC guidance, but they didn't affirmatively say in that initially that this is what we're doing too. They just kind of summarized it and kind of said, this is a good idea. Mount Prospect on its website specifically said that until such time as the Illinois Department of Public Health says we're absolutely following CDC guidance, continue with the old guidance. So you just got to kind of work it down, federal, state, local. Are there any things that I need to be aware of before I put out a policy? But generally the guidance is, they're doing a really good job of trying to make sure it's consistent.
All right. Do you recommend a mandatory vaccination policy if we are not a healthcare? I would assume you're going to say no, but I want to hear a little bit more.
Yeah, so I don't know that we've had anybody, that's not true. We've had probably a manufacturing plant or two require mandatory vaccinations because the manufacturing plant can't close. But I don't know that many employers are mandating vaccinations unless they're in like a transportation field or a hospital environment. I think most employers are strongly encouraging it. I think they're providing access to the vaccination in terms of information and education. I think, again, a lot of our clients are not going with the giving another 80 hours of paid sick time, but they've become more flexible about, if you need 3 hours off on Friday to go get the vaccination, go get it. I don't know, we've had many clients incentivize people to get it. That was part of the latest guidance as well, that you can incentivize people to get it. I think most employers are strongly encouraging it, but they have not gone to the mandatory policy. If you go to mandatory, you got to be willing to live with those consequences too, right? So if I go to 100% mandatory and my best employee, he or she doesn't get it, my best sales rep, my best vice president, my best line worker doesn't get it, what am I going to do with that person? Am I going to fire them? If I fire them, they collect unemployment. What am I going to put them, suspend them? What message is that sending? So I think many employers haven't gone the route of mandatory vaccination. I think they're strongly encouraging it, educating, trying to get people there, and then dealing simply, for lack of a better word, with the exceptions of those who haven't gotten it.
All right, we have a question about how can you tell a spouse of a cancer patient that they have to come back to work when FMLA allows you to have the FMLA to take care of your spouse?
That's true. In this particular case, the spouse does not qualify for FMLA. So you're absolutely right. In the particular case, if it's a serious health condition of the spouse, you're able to take FMLA for that. In this particular case, this employee is not eligible for FMLA. So it's strictly an ADA accommodation analysis.
All right, we've heard that some people have passed away from getting the vaccine. Would the company be accountable for forcing the employee to get vaccinated if something like this happens to the employee?
So the company's not forcing the employee to get vaccinated. The company's simply encouraging it. I don't know of any case where the company could be held liable for, even if it's a mandatory vaccination policy. We haven't seen anything come back where an employer could be held liable for a mandatory vaccination policy. The employee could choose not to get it, right? That federal court in Texas said it's not coercion to have a mandatory vaccination policy. The employee can choose to get it or not, meaning the employee can make the choice that if I want to continue working here, I'll get it. If I don't like the mandatory nature of the vaccination policy, I don't need to continue working here. So the mandatory vaccination is a condition of employment, but you don't have to accept that condition. You can choose not to work here. We'll see if other courts follow that analysis. So that's a Texas federal court, district court in Texas. Other circuits may weigh in on that. So really that federal district court in Texas is one of the first federal courts to weigh in on the mandatory vaccination policy. We'll see how other courts weigh in on that.
With the vaccine, companies have total immunity from legal liability. If an employer requires an employee to take this EUA vaccine, does the employer own that liability now?
No, I don't think so. No. So again, we're not, are we talking in a mandatory situation or voluntary?
Alex, do you want to chime in? I would assume mandatory, he says.
Okay.
So
again, I think it's a variation of the earlier question. The employers, I don't think the employer is going to be held liable in these cases. Again, it's still to be seen, but I don't think it's going to be, because even though the employer is calling it mandatory, the employee, at least in the federal court case in Texas, is saying it's mandatory if you want to work here. You can choose not to work here.
Do you have a sample work from home policy you can share with us?
I don't have I can probably provide one sample to the group. It's not it's a template from a template policy I could provide to the group. I'll send it to you. Really in the policy, you're going to set out the requirements for the leave, work from home expectations, that type of thing. I'll send you a Word document that you can kind of work through and see if that works for you.
Thanks, Frank. We have another question. In our manufacturing setting, we have copies of all the vaccination cards as the requirement if they wish to not wear a mask at work. We sent communication to that effect and told employees that they should wear a mask if they are not vaccinated or if they just feel more comfortable wearing one. That way, we aren't encouraging silos of those who have those who haven't. We will require the same at the office once we start work in September. So I think this was someone that was just adding a comment in here. We have a question from John. Does anyone have an interim business travel policy for employees that they can share with me? Or Frank, do you have any advice on that?
Yeah, the travel is really interesting because the travel policy is really still being developed. I think the answer is I don't have a travel policy because every company is doing a little bit differently. Part of this, working from home and using Teams and Zoom may have changed travel just a little bit, although obviously in the paper today, they're talking about air travel rebounded very quickly. I don't know if that's vacation travel or business travel, but certainly I think the use of Zoom and Teams and all these other resources will change travel just a little bit, but it won't change overall in terms of clients still are going to want to see you regardless of the business you're in. But But travel is different because we have different needs, right? Are you comfortable with me coming to see you? Are you open? You know, we have several clients who aren't open yet and won't open till after Labor Day. So travel is going to be different. I'm not sure I'm answering that well. I don't have a interim travel policy.
Frank, we have no other questions, so I'll open it up if anybody wants to speak up and ask any additional questions to Frank.
I have a question. Our president wants to send out an individual email to those that have not been vaccinated to kind of go over everything that I've already communicated to them, you know, basically that we will allow them to have time off and that we do give an incentive, but then he also wants to address what he considers concerns about not being vaccinated to try and encourage them to be vaccinated. Do you think that's a good idea?
No, I don't know that I would be sending out individualized emails or individualized communications. If I'm sending a communication, I want to keep it broad and make sure that I'm not, for lack of a better word, isolating people or targeting people. There are many reasons why people may not be vaccinated. And we just don't know why they're not being vaccinated. It could be religious belief, disability, pregnancy, compromised immune system. We don't know why people aren't being vaccinated. They may just simply not believe in the vaccination, like one of the examples I used earlier. I would continue encouraging people, but I would not go to the idea of sending out personalized communications because I think that would be, especially if it's coming from a president or a senior executive of the company, I think that would be considered kind of coercion, you know, kind of a little bit heavy-handed that this is what I believe, you should believe it too. And I think we're walking a fine line there with the vaccinations. We're hoping people get vaccinated. Again, we're hoping the vaccine's effective, right? We're all hoping that. We're all hoping that those of us who did get vaccinated did the right thing. We don't know yet. So we're relying on a lot of faith and belief in the government and the vaccination and the drug industry. But I don't know that I'd reach out to individuals and, you know, kind of isolate them into or, you know, forcing them to get a vaccination that they may not want or they may not be able to get for a particular reason that we're not aware of. And they're not willing to share that information with us, that they're receiving cancer treatments or they're receiving some other type of care that doesn't allow them to get the vaccination.
Thank you.
Other questions? We still have about 9 minutes left, so I just want to make sure that you guys use this time with Frank.
Do any members currently have a policy put together that they would be willing to share and we could look at it and edit it to fit our company?
If people do have a policy, Katie, where should they send it so everybody can benefit from it?
They would send it to Kristen, so I can stick Kristen's email in the chat for everybody if you do have a policy and you're willing to share it. So give me 1 second and I'll throw that in now. And then are there any other questions either for Frank or for the group? All right, it's in the chat. Otherwise, Frank, is there any last minute tips or tricks you want to tell us about before we end this great conversation we've had with you today?
No, I think it's a challenging time, obviously, for all of us. We're trying to do the best we can. The guidance is just that, it's guidance, right? It's not the law, but it's all we have. So if we're gonna defend ourselves in some type of action or some type of something later, so I think following the CDC guidance and EEOC guidance and OSHA guidance is really our best defense. And even in that Texas case, the employer cited to the EEOC guidance. Again, not the law, but the courts are going to look to the agencies to provide guidance for employers. So to the best of our ability, if we can keep abreast of that guidance, check it periodically, these great forums here talking about it. What are you doing? One of the things that I think is good about these types of forums is, talk to each other. What are you doing in your company? How did you handle the situation? We're doing the same thing internally. We're presented with situations that, nobody's ever dealt with before. So what are we doing? We're doing the same thing you are. We're talking internally. These are the facts. This is the company's policy. How do you see the same facts? What's the latest guidance? And you're trying to massage that to do what's best for the company and best for the employee in that particular case. And you're doing the best you can with the guidance you have. And that's really what we're trying to do here is do the best we can, following our company's procedures, our company's policies, enforcing those to the best of our ability, helping senior managers and managers know that, yes, we can terminate that person. That's the easy thing to do. But here's maybe a better way to accommodate that. Or working with the doctors is going to be something for all of us, right? That sometimes the doctor believes he or she's helping, but in many ways they're actually hurting the employee by putting out accommodations that no employer could accommodate. So again, this is an evolving thing. I would encourage everybody to keep talking to each other, how you're working it in your company, talk to your legal counsel, call us, whatever you want to do. Just talk through the issues before you make the final decision. So you make the final decision on the best information you have available.
Frank, we had a last minute question come in. Does the fact that the vaccine is only authorized for emergency use and not approved have any weight in your decision making it mandatory vaccine policies?
No, I don't think so. And it didn't affect the court in Texas either. So even though it's emergency approval, the courts are basically suggesting that it is approved. It's okay to do it. The EEOC wouldn't have put out its guidance on mandatory vaccinations if they were going to split the hairs and say, well, it's only emergency approval, it's not fully approved. I wouldn't worry about the emergency approval versus full approval.
All right, any other last questions?
Actually, Katie, this is Gail. I have a question. If you have a company who is mostly remote, but they go to visit, they go on client visits, is there anything? I mean, should we just follow the company policy, or is there any internal policy that should be put in place regarding that?
Yeah, so this is interesting because obviously client visits, right? So we have our company's policy, and then the client may have a policy as well. So we have to balance our company's policy against the client's policy. So if our company policy, and this came up the other day, we have a manufacturing company in Illinois. They're traveling, their salespeople are traveling to North Carolina or South Carolina, and the company has a policy that the employees still must wear masks. Whether you're vaccinated or not, it's a manufacturing company, even the salespeople. So the salesperson question was, well, what do I do when I go to North Carolina? Do I still need to wear my mask? I'm not going to be able to sell our product in North Carolina if I'm the only one in North Carolina wearing a mask. So there's not going to be an easy answer there. I think what we're looking to do there is, what is our company's policy? What is our client's policy? Is our client going to say that if you're fully vaccinated, you don't need to wear a mask, or if you're, regardless of whether you're vaccinated, you need to wear a mask? So I think those questions are going to be, settled on a real world basis of what are we trying to accomplish internally, and then what is our client's expectations? Is the client open to visits? What's the client's protocols? We want to make sure that we're not violating the client's protocols, and we're trying to match our own protocols. I know that's not a good answer in terms of a black and white, but it really is, what are our policies? What's our client's policies? And then how do we continue this relationship with our client, regardless of the business we're in, so we don't infringe upon their comfort levels.
Gail, do you have additional questions?
No, that was it. Thanks a lot, Frank.
All right, Frank, we can't thank you enough for taking some time with us this hour to talk to us about all these topics and how great it is. So we appreciate your guidance on that. Everybody that attended today, thank you so much. We will be sending out Frank's PowerPoint, the Word document that he referred to as the template, and then the recording as well. And just want to make you guys aware that we are going to be having a forum this year. It will be taking place in October, and we'll get you guys out those dates. We're looking at having a theme on diversity and inclusion, so we want to get you guys excited. It's looking like it's going to be towards the end of October, but we wanted to let you know since that's 4 months out. So get excited. We are going to be back, and we're looking at doing it in person. So again, we'll get out the guidances related to that. Frank, again, thank you. Have a great day. Everybody else, thank you so much. Take care.